Greetings and welcome to our very first episode of the Entheogenic Roots podcast. I'd like to introduce to you our first guest, Rebecca Martinez, who is the author of a new book called Whole Medicine, A Guide to Ethics, which I'm very excited to read. She's also the founder of the Alma Institute here in Portland, Oregon. In our conversation, we explore many different topics that deal with what's developing in this space, neocolonialism, the indigenous voices and presence that needs to be involved in giving us the guidance and the insight on how to move and be present in this space for all those who want to share. So please join in, listen to the conversation, comment, like, and share. If you want to learn more about the Alma Institute and Rebecca Martinez, please follow all the links below, and also myself. You'll be able to find this podcast on Spotify and also on our website, again, which will be links below that you can actually follow. And so may this conversation benefit everybody who tunes in. And please engage with us, give us some feedback, and we're excited to bring you more content. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy. All right. Greetings and welcome, everybody. I'm Yochanan Al-Khemetic with Golden Embryo Productions, and this is our first podcast interview. I like to say interview instead of interview with Rebecca Martinez, and we'll let her introduce herself. But I just want to share a little bit of the vision of what we're doing here with the podcast, which is called Entheogenic Roots, the indigenous origins of the psychedelic culture, which I like to say didn't begin in the 1960s. And this is the companion to the actual documentary that we're filming alongside with Golden Embryo. And the vision is to just bring out the inner voice of the indigenous people that have been involved with the indigenous wellness culture for thousands of years, and how it's being portrayed or even represented in this day and age, where we see everything being, they're calling it a renaissance. But I question, like, who is the Renaissance for? And I feel that we need to really back up a little bit, have some deeper conversations, pump the brakes on what direction we're going in with this so-called Renaissance, and bring in more of the indigenous heart of what the wisdom traditions have been all about for a long time, involving entheogens. And so again, we're here with Rebecca Martinez, who's the founder of the Alma Institute here in Portland. This is where we're at today. And she also just released a new book, beautiful book. I can't wait to read it, called Whole Medicine. Yep. And I'll let you go ahead and explain what you're doing and where your vision is and where your heart is at in all of this.
Sure. So thank you for having me. Mm-hmm. This is a beautiful break in all of the different tasks involved with the type of work we're doing. So it's just wonderful to have a moment to slow down and come back to center about why we're doing all this.
Nice.
So my name's Rebecca. I was born a couple miles from here in Portland, Oregon, and grew up a little ways north on the Columbia River. And I've pretty much been in the Willamette Valley ever since.
It's beautiful up here. I love it.
It's so lush. I mean, truly, I saw some of the first camellias blooming the other day. It's like the crocuses are coming up, yes. And just I don't know if I'll ever be able to leave the Northwest. It's just dreamland. Yeah.
I tried before. I moved up from Long Beach back in '97,
mm-hmm.
and I've been in Oregon, just in different places on the coast. Was my first place that I landed, but it was back in 2000 where I tried to leave, and it always pulls you back.
Mm-hmm.
Something about it.
Yeah. It's really, really special. So this is home. I am not native to here. That's one of my pet peeves. People say, "Oh, you're a Portland native." I say, I'm not native to here. This is other people's homelands. My family is indigenous to northern Mexico on my dad's side, and my mom's side is from Spain and Portugal. So that informs a lot of the work I do now, is just having mixed ancestry, having family line that were colonized peoples and that had such flourishing, beautiful histories before colonization, and then also histories of the people who came over and conquered. And so a lot of, I think, what my soul's path now is reconciling those, and it is. And I think that's a lot of like the bridge building I do now. This day and age, it manifests at Alma Institute, as you mentioned. We're a nonprofit focused on training and equipping people from marginalized communities to hold space with psilocybin in a good ethical way, and helping provide inroads so that they can work above ground if they so choose within the very fraught and new regulated access program here in Oregon. So that's kind of my day-to-day work, is leading a team of 5 and then our group of educators, navigating all of that. And then, as you mentioned, I'm also an author, so I'm really passionate about how we communicate about entheogens, about altered states. It's something that excites me, is the fact that interest is growing, and that is what I see as very fertile soil to really help influence the way that people relate to these medicines and sort of catch them on the way in and say, hey, welcome. Here's your orientation. Let's talk about how we got here, as opposed to catching people when they've already got businesses and a whole set of belief systems, you know?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
Later. It's crucial. Yeah. I like that. That's beautiful.
Thanks.
Can you tell us about what Alma Institute is doing? You said there's a team of 5 that you are working with, that are working with you. What is the main vision of Alma?
Yeah, well, really, Alma came about because I was working on the Measure 109 campaign as a staff member, and I was traveling around the state of Oregon and training volunteers how to go get signatures on the sidewalk, and trying to get, I think it was 185,000 signatures to get this bill passed.
Right.
And on one hand, I saw so much enthusiasm, and believed that this measure would pass. And on the other hand, I saw such a lack of representation around who was showing up to these gatherings. It was largely white community members, upper middle class, a major lack of representation of everyone else who lives and makes their lives here in Oregon, and those who stand to benefit who would be coming here.
That's interesting.
And I think it's a holdover from the drug war. It's a holdover from the narratives around psychedelics and what they do and who they're for.
Yeah. The counterculture movement of the 60s and 70s. And,
yes. And yeah, a lot of wonderful, amazing white hippie types, you know, who are, of course, like such a vital part of this too, but it's not the whole story.
True.
And so when Measure 109 did pass, I felt this pang of, maybe I could call it remorse or uncertainty around just the question of, was this the right way to bring these medicines forward in such a big way? Was this the right first move? And I still have a lot of questions around that.
I feel that, yeah, me too.
I'm here for broad decriminalization, you know, and that's not what this measure is.
Right.
And at the same time, I believe that there are so many people who can benefit from a program like this, but it depends on how we create it, how we build the infrastructure, who's opening centers, who's working as facilitators. And so I thought, instead of washing my hands of the measure and saying, I'm just going to focus on further, you know, drug policy reform, let's actually sink in a little bit and see if we can, here at the center of this program, shape something that is built on equity and access and justice and sacred reciprocity and relationship to the roots of the medicines.
Beautiful.
Knowing that would be a huge, tall order and that we would fail again and again along the way. But we're 2 years in now, and so far, I feel like we're still on the path, though there's still so much to learn.
True.
Yeah.
Let's get some clear definitions as to what the 109 is opposed to the 110. Because there's both of those that are functioning right now here in Oregon, right?
Sure. So Measure 109 is the Psilocybin Services Act. It passed in 2020 and essentially created this regulated access program for psilocybin specifically. So it's a very contained, I have a friend who likes to say it's a sea or an island of legality within a sea of illegality.
Right.
So it creates legal pathways, but in a very narrow defined way to consume psilocybin. That is, it creates licenses for mushroom growers, for facilitators, who are the people who hold space, and for licensed service centers. And then there's another sort of approval process for training programs specifically designed to train facilitators. And so now in Oregon, we're actually just up the street from one of the centers today. Anyone who doesn't have certain contraindications and is over the age of 21 has the choice to participate in a mushroom session or a mushroom ceremony, depending where you go, with a licensed facilitator who's been trained to support people in altered states. And
that's all functioning under 109 and being regulated
that's
by
all 109.
that particular bill. Okay.
And so far, I think about 1,000 people have accessed services through that channel.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it really got going late 2023. There was kind of this slow start, and this will be the first year that really services are going all year with active service centers, more people being trained, enough supply of mushrooms, the whole thing. So that's 109. Measure 110, we actually shared an office, 109 and 110. So it was like real solidarity with because Measure 110 is a much more radical drug policy reform. And it essentially decriminalized the small use and possession, that is certain defined amounts of all illegal substances, without criminal penalty. So it rolled out in its own way, and it's actually currently at risk of being repealed. We'll know in March. Yeah, and oh gosh,
It sounds like a big train wreck, if you ask me.
It's been really hard because I have so much to say about mushroom.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, it was always a risk because there's nothing like it. And at a certain point, I think the activist community understood, and everyone who's been against the drug war, as is criminalization a way to create health and safety for people? Is that an okay way to deal with substance use? I think largely the growing populace of this country and beyond say, no, that's not the way. There's we need to look at what's at the root of substance use challenges as opposed to criminalizing and further putting people in the criminal justice system. That seems pretty common sense, and Measure 110 actually passed with more voters than Measure 109. And there was not, from my understanding, the support at the state level for the rollout that was needed. And I think that was a big part of it, is the mechanism to not only not criminalize people, but also to create these added resources for people. So taking cannabis tax funds and using them to fund treatment centers and peer support and other alternatives, I think is a really thoughtful, beautiful approach. It's not just saying we're going to decriminalize and leave everyone to figure it out themselves. It's let's put more supports in place. And the measure did put certain parameters, that a certain number of these centers needed to be open in every county in Oregon by a certain time frame. But the staff were not provided with the resources they needed in order to give the grants to all these community groups that said, we want to open a center. These are rural areas. This is like all around the state. These groups popped up and said, we want to be that here. And the resources, it was, I think, a bureaucratic nightmare. And I think that was a large part of why Measure 10 has not been the success that we want it to be. And, I have my own hunches around, potential sabotage. Not everyone wants this measure to be in place. And in fact, there's a lot of people who don't want it to be.
Yeah, I know, right? On the far right and everything. And yeah, you can sense that. There's people that have been outspoken. Out in the eastern part of Oregon and things, and heard about all that.
Yeah.
Ooh, it's tricky. It's a slippery slope.
It's hard.
Yeah.
And I think the drug war is not going to be dismantled overnight.
Yeah.
And the methods we have to be thoughtful about.
Indeed.
And at the same time, regardless of what happens with Measure 110, it has furthered a conversation and gotten the broader public to really question some assumptions we've had about drug criminalization, which I see as forward progress.
True.
You know?
Yeah.
And then, of course, with any drug policy reform, we have to continue to iterate and learn lessons and then come back to the drawing board and say, okay, how do we be smarter? How do we be more strategic? How do we be more effective and humane in what we're doing?
Yeah.
And passing a bill is extremely expensive, and I know it's hard if you set a precedent that something can't work.
Right.
It's that much harder next time around.
Right.
So that's something we're going to have to contend with.
Yeah, I wonder where it's going to land. Mm-hmm. But on this note, I would like to open up the platform in the space of, I mean, it's hard to do to not come from a political perspective here. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to invite that and to really look into more of a personal, heartfelt, and also, if you will, a wisdom eye perspective as to like having insight and foresight as to, you know, how do we get here? Where are we at? And where are we actually going? And do we need to actually look at some ways of refining what's taking place? Maybe go back to the drawing board and look at other ways of rearranging. And my approach and my vision is to bring more of the indigenous voice and wisdom perspective in, and elders. Where are our elders at? For guiding this, you know? Have they been invited to these conferences and to these tables and to these discussions and drawing up the bills and, you know, creating these regulatory type political establishments? I feel, you know, my personal feeling is that we need to pump the brakes a bit and bring in more of that. I don't think it's too late. What do you feel? What do you say to that?
I mean, I agree. It's of the utmost importance. It's almost like there is no point trying to normalize psychedelic healing if we're not doing it in a way that is grounded and rooted and sincere.
True.
You know? I also don't think it's too late, but I think we might need to reconsider some of the ways that we've been moving thus far.
True.
You know, even the sort of policy first approach, I've been in some of those spaces. And policy is such a heady, very wide view. I'm glad that there are people who can operate in that way. And it's really hard to bring the heart and the relationship and the history and context into those spaces because they're so oriented towards getting a result.
It's like a bulldozing mechanism, it feels. That's the way I see it.
And even like this sort of like parachute policy making where groups will come in from outside of a community with the bill or some assumption about what a bill needs to be, and then go try and rally local support as a means of getting a result, as opposed to, I mean, listening sessions, all of that is so important, but it's almost like it's being done backwards, where spending time doing what you're doing, spending time understanding what's happening, and then responding accordingly. Maybe the response wouldn't be policy change. Maybe it would be, let's establish more mutual aid networks or more community groups or drug testing or apprenticeship opportunities underground. There's so many other ways to have a result or to be effective with regards to creating safer access to psychedelics, if that's what the shared goal is. I also think that's the question is, do we have a shared goal as a field? Because I see many agendas. I have an agenda, you have an agenda. I know people in the field who we have very divergent visions.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think that's okay. And I think when we talk about pumping the brakes, I've had a whole process around this myself because there were some years when I felt a lot of rage around what I was seeing. And particularly the amount of investment coming into the field, the people trying to get patents on things that should not be patented.
I call that colonial capitalism. We got to call it what it is.
Yes. And how do you witness that and not feel enraged?
Yeah, I can relate.
And for me personally, it started to feel really disempowering because it's like the machine of colonial capitalism is so big and so heavy and fast moving. And I have felt a number of times sort of sitting at a crossroads of, can I continue to be in this space and be adjacent to these things happening and not become completely jaded, not lose my hope, and not get sucked into that narrative that that's how things have to be done.
Right.
And so it's been really important for me to not use stopping that train as my metric of success, but rather to look at, okay, so what can we do at the community level?
Right.
What can we do to build power and to leverage the power that we have to bring forth these medicines in a good way in the real world?
Yeah,
you know,
I love that question.
If I never knew about Compass Pathways, like Compass Pathways isn't affecting my city as far as I could tell. We're here in our city,
Exactly.
you know, we have impact. And so I think that has shaped the way that I approach movement work to be much more locally focused, much more specific, because you, myself, all the activists we've ever met in this field, we could spend our whole careers trying to stop the people who are ready to make money off psychedelics.
And it can get so exhausting.
It would feel like a waste of the energy we could use to create really beautiful things.
Yeah.
You know?
I think it can lead towards apathy and a lot of resentment, which
burnout.
We still need to work on all of that. It's still there. Because, you know, when we speak about decolonization, we're not talking about colonization of the past. We're talking about neocolonialism today, here. And I see it happening in this space especially. So yeah, I like those questions that you present there, and I think it's very important to look at it that way and to find, those ways of being local and grassroots and empowering people that are really on the ground, that are here, that are doing it, that it may not have, all the resources, but we have a different form of resource, And with that said, like, how would you see or like, what would you like to hear as far as the indigenous wisdom showing up in this space? Like, if we were to sit in council with the elders, what would they say around this? What are they saying today?
I think about some of my elders who, whenever I ask them a question like this, there always seems to be just like this little chuckle and almost like this energy of like patting me on the head, like, like, oh, well, how long do you have, And I think you're so right on with slowing down as an essential part of it. The pace of nature is the pace of indigenous communities, and there's a rhythm to it. There's bursts of energy, and then there's bursts of rest and digest, and taking time to listen and notice and be humble and be willing to be wrong and course correct, and then periods of responding and taking action based on, what you've heard. And that, I can imagine if we were collectively moving in that way. I mean, not only in the psychedelic field, but just as humans, like, it's so good for us. It actually feels like it's a non-negotiable, because that's we are nature. This isn't just our playground to exert our wills on, and our entire systems are primed to have rhythms, and frankly, primed to not be in control and not be in charge all the time. And right now, humans have so much power that we've taken, particular groups of humans more so than others. But I think that relationship to our power is a big part of what's happening right now, and our desire for control over others, control over resources, control over our own collective consciousness. And so I think modeling slowing down is a big part of it. I have this desire that we would spend more time sitting with the medicines, with our loved ones, with our elders, and less time at conferences, on stages, and kind of rooting down into deeper relationship, because all these medicines are conscious. I don't know one indigenous person who would question that. Even now, there's beautiful work being done with ketamine with indigenous communities. It's the embrace that I've seen has been sort of surprising, because I think of my own grandmother or others who it's like, this is the way something's done and we don't veer from that, and there's a place for that. But I think one thing to remember for those who don't come from indigenous communities, and even I am far removed, I'm in Portland, Oregon. This isn't where my family's indigenous to, but I think it's important to understand that indigenous communities are not static. They're not ancient or like fixed in their practices. Yeah, and generation to generation, there's always that tension of the older, wiser generations helping preserve things, and then often the younger ones saying, well, what if we iterate on this? What if this evolves? And that intergenerational transfer of knowledge also means the evolution and the growth of that shared knowledge, And we have an opportunity as people to participate in that same practice, which is really listening and learning, and then saying, are we questioning the right parts? Are we honoring the right parts? And that's a process that I think needs to be lifelong. So letting go of this idea that anyone's an expert, and retaining that sort of learner's, curious, student, apprentice mindset. We have to do that. I don't care how old I get. I don't care how many letters I have after my name, or how many, we have to, because if we are not listening, we're not going to be listening to the medicines. We're going to go into our ceremonies with some idea that we're all buddy-buddy with the medicines. We're locked in like this, and then what if I'm off course? I need to be able to hear that and respond.
Yeah.
That's a desire I have for all of us, especially those of us who have earned or not earned, but just have authority in any way. That's a responsibility,
True.
To move even slower with the more weight of like decision-making power. Like, oh, if I have decision-making power, I need more elders in my ear.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that I've noted, like going out to the conferences and stuff, is that a lot of, discussion is always around the new science that's being discovered, the opportunity or the potential for healing, traumas, mental imbalances, mental illnesses, all these different things, which is all beautiful and lovely, of course. But I think there's always a missing discussion in there about, like, where did this trauma come from in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
We're healing from this trauma, but there's so many different layers of it, and every culture has their own particular sources. And when we talk about this collective trauma, especially in the BIPOC community, I see clearly that it has come from the colonizer. And I'm always asking, like, where's the discussion about how were entheogens used prior
Mm-hmm.
to colonization?
Mm-hmm.
And what was going on in those circles, in those teepees, in those medicine huts, and, underneath the stars thousands of years ago, before there was this trauma that we need to heal from.
Mm-hmm.
When I was 15, I was given about a quarter of some psilocybin. A friend of mine's father took myself and my friend up to the San Bernardino Mountains in Southern California. And I recall always, prior to taking them, always hearing about an altered state of consciousness and being afraid, maybe like, oh, do I need to alter my state of consciousness? Like, what does that mean? Am I going to become lobotomized or stuck in this other way of thinking or being and seeing things after I take these? And one of the most amazing messages that came through for me, taking that amount, which at that point was a hero's dose, I was only 15 years old. And the realization came to me immediately, like, this is not an altered state of consciousness. This is the actual real baseline of consciousness. Being not under the influence of the entheogen is the altered state. And that's what I was given as a message there. And I think we need to really reframe and find new ways of speaking about these things, because I feel that this, for me, having that idea or that fear of being altered, it was definitely a colonized mindset of thinking that, well, this is not for me. This is something that these other people do. At that age, being a melanated young man in Long Beach, California, it was always stigmatized as a hippie thing, a white hippie thing that people do. We as Black people don't do those mushrooms. They don't take LSD. That's not for us. But then, again, it flipped my entire perspective and showed me no, this is our medicine. This has always been our medicine. And this is not the altered state. And this is actually the state of being. So I really enjoy that about the entheogens. It reveals that genuine, authentic, human, just natural state of being. The nature of reality. Yeah. Do you want to speak about some of your experience with entheogens and how they affected you and inspired you?
Yeah. I mean, what you just shared resonates so much. And that feeling that, this has been here all along.
Yeah.
That's definitely been a big piece. I feel like I was always seeking that sort of more expanded awareness, but didn't know what was possible until the first time I had mushrooms. And I was in my mid-20s. I had seen mushrooms before. My brother sold mushrooms and plenty of other things.
Everywhere, right?
My mom, it's a whole other story for some other time. But when I finally came around, I was going through some major life changes and was ending a marriage and had a son that was 3 years old. And I moved into an urban farm community with several other families just south of Portland. And there was another mother there who was a herbalist, and she was learning how to hold space for people with mushrooms. So she asked me if I would be interested in kind of being one of her test subjects, and she said, I'd love to gift you a session, and what do you say? And I agreed immediately. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I knew that there were things that I was storing that I had not processed. And I don't think I even realized how much was in there or how much was gonna come through. And she didn't go easy on me. She gave me 5 grams of cyanescence mushrooms, wild grown from here in these lands. And I'm glad she didn't tell me how much she was giving me, because I probably would have been terrified. But yeah, she gave me a teapot, and I went up into this big leaf maple treehouse and it was like a late summer afternoon, and I got to spend my first real psychedelic experience in a tree, wrapped around this tree trunk. And there were all these crows that came down and landed and were just kind of standing guard, and I was up there all day. She was down at the house, just had music going, was cleaning and singing, and was just like, are you good? Do you need anything? And I was in the treehouse, but I felt like I landed for the first time. I was like, it was like this relief in my spirit. And I had come from a very Christian upbringing, and I had left that faith about 3 years earlier during my pregnancy. And I felt like I could hear this divine being saying, welcome back. I'm not who you thought I was. And that was so profound for me, because in my period of atheism, I felt like God had died. Mm-hmm. And I felt such a cold, rational way of relating to the world that it was like that spark and that sense of connectedness. I had dulled it because I didn't trust the church. I didn't trust the dogma. And I had sort of thrown all that out with it. And so it was like a relief in my spirit, you know?
Beautiful.
And yeah, and I didn't go in with a clear, you know, explicit intention. I felt like, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know where they're going to take me. So I just want to be open. Yeah. I want to listen. I want to come back safely. Yeah. You know, I don't want to be lobotomized, like you said. Yeah. And it was incredible the ways that I was able to reconnect with my mother's line and my father's line in that time. You know, I at one point felt like I was in a womb again, but it was like I was running through not just being myself, but being my mother and her mother, and just the return to being held in that way. And then for the first time, I was able to connect with my father's line, and I could hear people speaking Spanish, and I thought it was the crows, or I thought maybe the landscapers were actually here and I was physically hearing them, but it was just coming through from being in another space, you know? And so I think that set the bar pretty high, you know? And, you know, I did have a few years where I was sold. I was like, well, this is only one entity I can get to know, these mushrooms, like, you know, and so I was fortunate enough to have access to people who were really, really intentional with substances and with testing substances and with having relationships with where they were getting them. And so I spent a few years just exploring and, you know, all kinds of environments, but really I think coming back again and again to, I think there's a place for celebration and there's a place for just creativity. And for me, I really have found that mushrooms specifically are such a huge part of my spiritual path that's I think what I will come back to again and again is spending time with them.
I can relate to everything that you said. You know, my first experience that I mentioned was also with a tree. I was at the base of a beautiful grandmother tree. Mm. She just gave me all these amazing downloads and empowerments. And I was also raised Christian, so I can relate to all of that. Mm-hmm. And I was just transitioning out of that time. I was doing more of exploration into like comparative religions, spiritual traditions, the mystery schools, and so yeah, everything just culminated in partaking of those beautiful fruiting bodies. Mm-hmm. They have so much to share. It's amazing. Have you partaken of ayahuasca?
I have.
Nice.
Yeah. Like how much detail can I share? I was in the United States. Okay. I got invited by one of my mentors to go sit in the circle she's a part of in one of the southwestern states, so I'll be vague. And I decided to, as a preparation, to take a road trip and camp on my way there. Okay. And so I was able to have a few days just myself and on the land along the way. And it was just one night, but oh my gosh, I know everyone says it's ineffable and that it's really, I still struggle to describe how that experience was. But at that time, I had been waiting because I felt there needs to be intention with all of these medicines, but I felt such a reverence for ayahuasca. And I felt clear that it shouldn't be something that I go seek out, that it would be clear when it was my time. And I was like, I want her to invite me. I want the way to be opened for that to happen. And so I went into it feeling that I was invited. And at the time, I was really going through it. I was 6 months into founding my nonprofit and was struggling with the funders and the business and the regulatory bodies, and felt so far from ceremony. I felt like I was getting lost in like the gray boxes of regulation and bureaucracy. And on my way, it was like as I crossed through all these different territories to get to the Southwest, it was like all of that was just shedding layer by layer. So by the time I got there, I was just like, I felt so raw and so worn down and ready to receive. And I was prepared for, a tough time. I was prepared to essentially go through the washing machine and have my ass handed to me. Like, I don't know what's about to happen. And that wasn't what I experienced at all. I felt like I was, and it was through the night, the ceremony. So we were in a year in the dark. We started when sun went down. We were there all night. And I felt like I was sitting at the feet of a grandmother, and she was just braiding my hair and stroking my hair and just saying, stay a while. Like, you're doing a good job. And I came up to the medicine man at one point. He was doing some doctoring, and getting over there was like a journey unto itself. I only had to travel maybe 8 feet, but in the dark and in the medicine, it was a whole quest. And when I got there, he said, you have a child? And we had barely met. We had introduced ourselves on the way in. And he kind of gave me a blessing for my son and acknowledged the responsibility that I've had. I had him when I was 22. And he put this sort of like protection over me. And as he was giving me this blessing of like the eagle and the red-tailed hawk, we heard all these coyotes howling. And he was like, do you hear that? And it was just, it felt like an initiation in a really powerful way. And it felt like it gave me the courage to keep going. And it also opened up probably the hardest 1.5 years of my life. And I go back to that point again and again, because I know that I made a commitment at that point to the medicines. Mm-hmm. And I thought that the ceremony was going to be grueling, but really the life as ceremony since then.
Still integrating, right?
Oh my gosh. And I actually just spoke yesterday with a friend who lives in that area. And I said, I think I need to come back to those lands and tie that up.
Yeah.
And
the coyote, that's such a beautiful totem. Spirit animal for those lands, for the people of those lands down there. So it's beautiful that happened for you.
Yeah. We have to make time to be in ceremony.
True.
And I want to never forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one beautiful thing I think about entheogens in general. They always stay with you. You can always tap right in. Like all the experience that I've ever had with ayahuasca or psilocybin, I forget what happened yesterday. I forget what happened a couple of days ago. Like, I try to review the week. I'm like, but when it comes to these experiences, every single detail, like, I retain, I know the commitments that are made, the promises that are made. It's just so beautiful that they stay with you, so deeply intimate and integral, intertwined into your being. So that's an amazing thing.
They're almost like milestones. It's like I can see the chapters in my life marked by these important experiences of coming back and, checking in, getting some guidance to go forward with. And that's why I really try to space them out.
Yeah.
Integration is so underrated.
I know.
I don't think we understand it in this short context.
I know.
I don't think we take it seriously enough.
I even say for pre-integration and post-integration. First time I partook of ayahuasca was back in 2002, and I'm still integrating from the first ceremony that I had all these years later. And it's something that doesn't really have a time frame. Just like, anything that happens that's impactful to you, grieving, for instance, it's a lifetime, and I think, like you said, there's not enough discussion around this or understanding of the vital importance. You hear people talking about it, you hear people, trying to invite it in and explore it more, but there has to be, I think, a deeper, just personal experience with it to know exactly. I hear about these new practitioners that are coming on board, signing up for these schools and these courses to become therapists, and it's, psilocybin or psychedelic assisted therapist. I hear a lot of them has never even partaken of any medicines at all. They're just like signing up and they're going to be ready to serve and assist others in this. I'm wondering, like, how's that going to work? I think it's going to be a big teachable moment for a lot of people.
Yes. Yeah, we had that conversation early on at Alma Institute was, can we require that people have had their own experiences?
Yeah.
And I think where we landed was, okay, legally, maybe we can't require it.
Right.
But we have a lot of things that we're looking for as we try to gauge whether someone might be ready to become a facilitator. And we do want to understand not only their reasons, if they just think this is a great way to help people heal from PTSD, that's probably not enough,
Exactly. Yeah.
That can be noble in its own way, but this is a whole
I
thing.
liken it to somebody who's studying to become a pilot. There's so many hours you have got to put in before you can take passengers with you on a flight. I mean, I think it's vital that you have some good hours put in.
Yes.
In your own experiences that are spaced out. You don't have to go through a crash course and, all right, this weekend I'm going to take this much and I'm gonna be ready for this. No, take some time.
And I think that's an important piece. It's important. We're not talking months, we're talking years.
Exactly.
Years.
Yeah.
Because I also want to caution folks around like what I call the psychedelic evangelist phase, And someone goes to the jungle and they have this profound experience, and there can be, as much as the ego death, there can be the ego inflation, and the medicines told me I'm a healer. Like, we hear it again and again. And often I'm like, there is this thread of truth in that you should hold to, but you need time to digest that.
Completely.
Because it's probably not what you think it is.
And it's not what you even want. Like, it's not even that fun.
It's not. It's a grind. We could have had easier paths. We'll just say that.
Yeah.
And so I think trying to understand how folks relate to even what the responsibility is of holding space and of working with the medicines in that way. And going back to what you had mentioned around the indigenous roots, that is something that gets lost in these programs, is the path of apprenticeship being really long.
Yes.
And not just, I'm going to check these boxes and then I'm guaranteed on the other end, but you're going to have someone who's over your shoulder guiding and supporting you, who's they're deciding when you're ready to take on more responsibility. And I really have high hopes and visions that we can weave that in.
Good.
As we do our work at Alma, and we do ask our participants to join a community of practice for 3 years after they graduate, which is, it's not enough, but it's at least an effort to, hey, we stay in relationship. When you become a space holder, that's the beginning of years of learning.
Yeah.
There's certain learnings you cannot prepare for in a classroom or even in role playing. As much as we do practicum, you're going to be confronted with new situations that the person you're responsible for is going through in real time.
So true.
And do you have the humility to handle those with a lot of care and go slow and be really thoughtful and intentional, because this is not child's play. This is spirit work.
Exactly. I think people need to learn to discern between, is this going to be a way you're making a living, or is this a real livelihood, a dharmic path that you're being called to, that you're being invited into by, the higher forces and indigenous ancestors.
Yeah. And a part of me hopes that the people who are coming into this for financial reasons will sort of self-filter out.
Yeah.
But I don't know that that's the case. And so we have a responsibility at the programs and also just as a community to have some standards around how we legitimize people who hold space. And that doesn't mean they have to be a therapist. That doesn't mean anything necessarily, except would I trust someone to be holding space for me if they haven't walked that path?
Right.
I wouldn't sign up with that facilitator,
Exactly.
personally.
Yeah.
And I think that that's totally valid,
True.
you know? So I would just look at the impulse to be in a leadership position. I think that's also, it's a very sort of Western American,
Oh, yeah.
you know, now we're in this culture of coaches and online courses. And
Yeah.
so being in that environment, we have to prevent the creep of that mentality from getting into medicine spaces, I think, whenever possible.
That's where I think the refinement piece comes in. And finding new ways, to engage that way. Let's talk about some of the things we mentioned before we began the interview. These tensions you were talking about.
Oof.
The good meaty stuff. We're at that point now.
Well, we were talking about just the sort of inherent tensions of activism and wanting to be effective within established systems. And I was just kind of sharing a bit about how it's a part of my struggle that I don't get to share about a lot. Because being in my position, I have to be so strategic. And I think that that's part of the tension is the code switching that is inherently a part of trying to be effective in a regulated program, a project like mine that is funded by philanthropists.
Yeah.
And so I often feel like I'm on this tightrope where there's what feels deeply true and what needs to be said. And then there's, if I say it just the way that it needs to be said, we may not be able to get back from that. We may scare off a funder.
Yeah.
We may scare off a regulator who's doing our inspection, you know? So I think for me, I'm still to this day in this exercise of trying to find where that line is for me, of really staying in my integrity. And I don't love the term playing the game, but understanding how things work. And for me, like the snake has always had a very like strong significance. And I think it's really that, or like if you imagine water like trickling down a rock, like it has this sort of, it's finding the path of least resistance. And there's a lot of resistance here. So for me, there's something really precious that we're trying to do. And I don't know if we can do it in this environment, but I want to find a way. And so I don't see it so much as manipulating. I think that's often, especially with women, it can be sort of conflated where, oh, you're being strategic, you're being shady. To me, it's survival. And it's how do I be consistent enough across channels that if someone sees this talk, if someone sees me in a boardroom with funders, they know, okay, that's still Rebecca and she's still, we know what she's about, you know?
Consistent,
yeah, I'm at the conference or I'm at the rhizome, you know, like, but I think that it's got added challenges being a woman, a young woman. I look even younger than I am. But then I have certain privileges. I get invited to certain tables because I'm a person of color, but look at me, like I'm as white as my mother, you know, so I don't threaten certain groups, you know. So there's advantages that come with it too. And I think that sort of bridge building that I spoke about earlier on is part of what I will always have to reconcile, you know? And, you know, I want to be more concerned with what the medicines think and with what my closest collaborators and elders think, and then have to let some things go, you know?
Yeah.
I will have activists and funders who are probably mad at me at any given time, and if I didn't, I probably am not doing a good job.
Right. Yeah. They say that we need haters because they're actually the ones that fuel our resolve and our resiliency, you know, to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
One way to look at it.
Yeah. I think it's all about why you have haters.
Exactly. It is.
Yeah, because I think that there's
gotta be good reason for it.
Yeah, and there will be critiques that are valid too. So having people critique you is not just a sign that you're standing up for something. It's, well, what is the critique? Do I need to actually be improving how I'm showing up?
It could be a good mirror, a good reflection, something. We all have our blind spots. We all got ways of not seeing things that need to be seen. And so, can we take constructive criticism? Yeah. Beautiful. This has been a lovely conversation.
Oh, I feel like we've just scratched the surface.
I know.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to just go ahead and give you the platform to share some closing reflections, some more ideas about what you got going on, anything you want the people to know when they see this interview, what's happening for you in the coming days, months, years. Yeah, feel free.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, there's two things I'm really excited about. The first one is my new book has just come out. So
yes,
I'll get you a copy.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's available everywhere. So I would love to have people check it out. There's an audiobook too, so people can listen on their walks.
Well, if you want to share some reflections, you know, this has been a lovely conversation. Thank you once again. Very pleasant. And if you want to share anything about what you're doing and offer, you know, to the public, to the people that are going to see this interview, all the things that you got going on.
Yeah.
It's a platform for you.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you again for the invitation. So there's two things I'm really excited about. The first one you mentioned, my book, Whole Medicine, A Guide to Ethics, is now out in the world. So people can find that wherever books are sold. There's an audiobook as well. That's part of my personal path. My website is RebeccaMartinez.co. So people want to go check that out and see what new podcasts are coming out or book events. That's all there. And then one thing I'm most excited about that's really got my full attention right now is we are working to open a psilocybin service center in Portland. Wonderful. With the Alma team. Beautiful. So I've got all sorts of T's to cross and I's to dot, but people can go to almatraining.org if they want to get on the newsletter to hear updates around how that comes together and, you know, light a candle for us. It's going to take a collective effort. And
open this year, or? We're
hoping to open late spring, early summer.
Oh, wow. Soon.
Yep. Soon. There's a lot in the works already. And the vision is really to host spaces for affinity groups, and particularly to be a space where we can hold impact pilots for specific populations that are not receiving access. So one of the first projects we're working on is for a group of formerly incarcerated women to experience psilocybin ceremony with wraparound care for months. And that's really close to my heart. And we really want it to become a community center where folks can come experience the medicine in a good way and feel like they can take some ownership over it. And after hours, maybe we'll be able to host some dance parties. Who knows? So
sounds good.
Stay tuned. Yeah.
We arise upon the first light, raise the sun to embrace the morning light of victory. We have won. Yo, within this rising, no longer dreaming is done. The light of consciousness shines to behold.